Hello, I'm Janet Silver. 6 provincial budgets were tabled this week: Quebec, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Ontario. These budgets all come following healthcare accords Ottawa has made with several provinces, including Ontario. And that is where we're going to begin, with Canada's largest province and its budget. Joining me now to break it all down are 2 experienced political operatives and my colleagues here at Syntax Strategic, Jon Dugal and Jake Enwright. And Jake, I'm going to start with you because earlier this week, Ontario's finance minister said the budget would be, quote, responsible, targeted approach, and that it would not mean further cuts. So what did we find out in the budget?
Certainly not a budget of cuts. It's the biggest budget in the history of Ontario. And I'm just going to say hi to my little boy who's walking in. There he is. Hi. Sorry. It's the largest budget in Ontario's history. So it's not a budget of cuts. It's aimed at the business community, as the government and stakeholders around the government have put it. Invest, 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 build, 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 workers, workers, workers. So it's about creating that sustainable, predictable investment environment that the government is hopeful is going to guide Ontario through the perceived economic turmoil around the corner from us.
Jon, your take. Any surprises for you in this budget?
No, not at all. It became pretty evident that the government was going to shift its focus back to business, obviously, over the last several months, especially with the potential for an economic downturn in the next maybe year. They're going to want to buttress the economic stability of the province going forward. If anything, I might say that I'm a little shocked at, let's say, the high level lack of focus on healthcare more broadly, because if you look across each of those other provinces, not platforms, sorry, but rather budgets that were released this week and including over the last couple of weeks, there is more of a defined emphasis on healthcare, specifically through the tagline and through the titles, where, for example, I believe in Nova Scotia, it was called Your Health, Our Priorities. So maybe a little shocked to not see that. However, if you go back over the last several months, you will recall seeing the provincial government and Doug Ford in particular being quite out front on the budget with significant new advancements to increase accessibility to healthcare. So it's not that much of a shock that they were able to pull the attention back to the business community where they want the attention to be.
It was kind of a boring budget, eh, John? Like, and you just pointed that out. You just said the right thing. Like, they had really paved the runway in advance of the budget. And if you read it, a lot of the big ticket items were pointing back to previous investments they'd made, like infrastructure, like healthcare spending, and it was boring. And I think that's actually good. I think a lot of pressure on political staff to come up with these big, fancy rollouts for these things. But at the end of the day, nobody really cares in the general public, especially the first year of a 4-year mandate. The opposition doesn't have a lot to criticize. I thought their office did a really good job leading up to the budget with announcing some big ticket items to kind of create some sustained media presence on the budget as a whole. But it was kind of boring, and I don't say that as pejorative. It worked.
What about spending, though? In terms of what was announced for spending, can we afford it?
Probably not. If you look at the breakdown, I mean, there's 2 things that stuck out to me. Yes, it's good that Ontario is on track to balance the budget next year. Yes, it's good that we're only about $1 billion in surplus, but there's 2 variables there that really tell more of the story. And the first is the transfer payments the province gets, which are significant, tens of billions of dollars. The second is the increased revenue as a result of inflation. I think a lot of people roll their eyes when they hear Pierre Poilievre say that inflation is just a government tax, but it does have that benefit. If you're paying more for goods, you're paying more tax on the cost of those goods. And in Ontario, that's led to increased revenue. If that increased revenue goes away, coupled with the need to provide targeted support to families if the economy really tanks, that could put their budgetary projections into a bit of a spiral.
Jon, I just want to pick up on something you said earlier. When we break down the budget in terms of sectors that may have, and I always hate to say the word one, but you said that the surprise for you was in terms of healthcare not getting as much as you thought perhaps they would, given other provinces. I know Nova Scotia did a lot in terms of healthcare in their budget. What other sectors may have won, if you will, in this budget?
Well, I think Jake hit the nail off the top with respect to the business community being the ultimate winner here. I think many of the measures there are going to be supporting growth at a time when, it can be a little inflationary in terms of growing too hot too fast. But at the same time, given the interest rate hikes of the Bank of Canada, I don't think that's much of a concern in Ontario. However, where I might put the attention is maybe more on the biomanufacturing side, which, yes, we didn't see as much in terms of overall spending or kind of overall movement forward. What we did see is a bit of a commitment to make more support available to the sector in itself through enhancements to the Taking Life Sciences to the Next Level strategy, for example, or by re-announcing the innovation pathway as part of that strategy. So to me, it's a bit of an inkling into where the government might try to go next, which is obviously within healthcare. And I think that resonates across the country too, because even the Prime Minister himself and his health minister at the federal level, they've been starting to shift their own narrative around health of late. We're starting to see a bit more with respect to buttressing the overall healthcare system, specifically in relation to the recently announced near $200 billion increase to the Canada Health Transfer, that health will now become an economic sector. And in Ontario, that's not anything different. So while we don't necessarily see, let's say, the net new spending earmarked to the building of hospitals, they still have their 10-year capital plan where you're going to see $48 billion go towards hospital infrastructure. They're still increasing investments into healthcare accessibility itself by $81 billion. So when you do round that out with the life sciences side, which does have an important role to play, whether it's on analgesics, whether it's on track and trace, for example, with respect to pandemics, or whether it's respect to testing for any number of chronic illnesses or transmittable diseases, that could be a real value add part of the Canadian economy moving forward, just as automotive has been for so many years in Ontario.
I'm nodding, Janet. I'm nodding. It's a boring budget. John and I agree. Like it is boring. There's no, and I say that in terms of like, there's no conflict point between political parties. The budget kind of has everything. And this is part and parcel for a government and a leader who believes in focusing on pragmatism, the coalition of pragmatism, as he's called it, who wants government to run smoothly and quietly and not rock the boat with people politically. But going back to your question, like who's the winner? The manufacturing sector is the winner. Massive announcement about a tax credit for capital investment. As I said at the top, they want to bring manufacturing back. It's all about investment, build. And then, the loser, the perceived loser is the big cities who are looking for a bailout from the money they've spent on managing the COVID-19 pandemic. I disagree with that. This budget, as John mentioned, highlights the investments in infrastructure. It commits to building more homes, and it gives a massive tax break to small businesses. Municipal leaders, they're going to benefit from these things politically. People really don't parse out who did what. But if those three things allow big cities to continue to be fairly affordable places to live, the new mayor of Toronto and Mayor Mark Sutcliffe are going to be the ones who also benefit at the end of the day.
Just before we leave, though, this boring budget, as you call it, Jake, I just wonder whether or not there was anything specific related in this budget to labor shortages, because Ontario, like the rest of Canada, is suffering a lot of labor shortages. And I'm wondering if they addressed this specifically in the budget.
Yeah, they did close to about $300 million, both for skills development and training of workers. You've heard me say it 2 times now, invest, build, or build. That part there, we're not there yet. We don't have the workers to do what the government plans to do over the next 10 years. As John mentioned, massive capital expenditures in the future related to just healthcare alone, let's say. We don't have the workers. And so the government's got to train these workers up and find ways to incentivize people to get into the skills trade needed to make sure that infrastructure is being built. 300 million there. It's a good thing. We just have to wait and see if it translates into actual results for the province.
In full disclosure, I'm just going to do a bit of a pivot here. We're recording this podcast on the same day that US President Joe Biden is here in Canada having bilateral meetings with the Prime Minister, is addressing the House of Commons. Then there's a big dinner tonight. John, I'm just wondering first to you in terms of what's on the table between the President and the Prime Minister when they meet today.
Yeah, I'm sure at some point the fact is going to come up that this is Joe Biden's first visit to Canada as a sitting president. Of course, he's been here before. When we rolled out the red carpet, so to speak, during his time as a vice president, he did an official visit. However, he has done a couple of visits elsewhere in the world. Of course, he did a high-profile visit to Ukraine, and that makes a lot of sense. But it is continuing to this day to be a bit of a sticking point with many Canadians that the sitting U.S. president did not visit Canada as his first official visit abroad. But when they do sit down tonight, they're going to have a couple things to toast, specifically around Roxham Road and closing the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement that would have allowed illegal migrant crossers, well, quote unquote illegal migrant crossers or irregular migrant crossers, depending on whose rhetoric you want to choose to go with, from entering from the United States into Canada. And based on that deal and what everything has been reported so far, Canada is on the verge of accepting 15,000 more migrants through legal channels in exchange for closing that loophole, closing down Roxham Road border crossing, and moving forward in a more sustainable legal fashion.
Sorry, I was all excited because when Janet was introing the topic there, I'm pointing and looking. The planes are flying over my house right now. You can hear them buzzing, the fighter jets, the escort from NORAD, which I didn't know they did. I mean, it's been a long time. What was the last time? 2008? Was a lot? No, 2011, 12, Janet, you would know when Obama was here.
2016.
15, Obama?
2016.
Yeah. Really? What do I know? It wasn't like I was around Parliament Hill.
Hey, COVID was a long 3 years.
Yeah. Anyways, I didn't live out in Orleans at the time, so I didn't hear the fighter jets buzzing on the outskirts of the city like I do now.
Jake, just before we go, I want to get your thoughts with regards to, we've heard, one deal that was reached just before the president arrived here in Canada. I'm sure there's a few things you've just mentioned NORAD as one, a few things that the president will be pressing the prime minister on in terms of defense, the Arctic, and I'm sure the prime minister will be pressing Joe Biden on the Inflation Reduction Act, which he signed last August, which will make it harder for energy companies here in Canada, given the Buy American First, which Biden put into place last August.
Yeah, let me say, first off, I disagree with John. I don't think there's many Canadians that care when the US president comes or not. Maybe I'm just a skeptic, but you're right. I think NORAD modernization is a big one on the radar for the two leaders, especially given the geopolitical tension that's starting to take over with China and the spy balloon, and then the maybe spy balloons, maybe weather balloons. But I think that was a bit of an embarrassment for NORAD. So there'll be, and the deficit and the need for NORAD modernization existed long before China started saber rattling more aggressively over Taiwan. I think you're right. The Buy America provisions as it relates to the energy sector will be on the table. I don't think that's a massive priority for the prime minister, but I also think the Biden administration will be pressing the importance on Canada to take more seriously foreign interference by China. There's a lot of people who observe the Security and Intelligence Committee who say that some Five Eyes partners don't want to share intelligence with Canada anymore because of some of the lack of interest and listening that happens at the political levels with our security agencies. It's a serious problem, and I expect that's something Biden will press Trudeau on.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you to my colleagues, Jon Dugal and Jake Enwright. I'm Janet Silver. Till next time.